Hello, everybody! Woohoo! Welcome to the Cackle. This is Entry Point's weekly interview series where we highlight small businesses, startups, and people I find super interesting and are relevant to the Midwest entrepreneurial ecosystem. I'm Emily Heinz. I'm the founder and managing director of Entry Point. And at Entry Point, we partner with economic development organizations and nonprofits to foster inclusive and vibrant communities across the Midwest through research and community-focused programming. So welcome to today. I'm super excited because we are talking to my good friend, Martin Dober from ID Ventures. Hello!
Hello!
We were just talking before we went live that we haven't seen each other in person since before the pandemic, which is bananas. I was like,
and
oh my gosh.
Who knows when we're going to see each other again? Isn't it sad?
So sad. So I'm although I think I'm getting more used to talking to people over the video where it feels a little bit more real now, which is probably a bad idea, a bad thing. That's when the robots will take over.
I mean, it's really interesting how things have changed, right? So now I feel really strange having a normal phone call with someone, right? It's
yeah.
Am I supposed to hold this to my ear and talk to people?
Yeah, it's before it was if someone asked for a video call, I was too familiar.
Oh,
and now if someone asks for a phone call, I'm very unfriendly. Okay, so Martin is a venture capitalist based in Detroit, but has worked in the entrepreneurial ecosystem all over the place. And you invest everywhere in Michigan. So talk a little bit about your background and Invest Detroit's investment focus and all of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, do you like how I've matched my shirt to the to my name below though?
That's what it's the tyranny of being on the Cackle. I'm you must wear.
Yes, I've watched all the past episodes and now I have to
colors.
Find the right shirt for this episode. So my background, was that the question?
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I mean, I've been working with ID Ventures on our venture capital team, and ID Ventures is the venture capital arm of Invest Detroit, our parent company. And I've been working here for the last almost 8 years. So it's been quite a while. I know you and I go way back, right? So at least 10 years, you and I go back. So
yeah, I remember you coming into the place I worked in 2009, and I would always be like, "Who is that?" It's the first. I remember that's the first time I saw you across the room.
Yeah. So before ID Ventures, you and I worked together at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which is this obviously Michigan State Economic Development Agency. I spent, I think, 7 years there altogether in various roles. My last role was leading up the entrepreneurship and innovation team, which kind of worked on a lot of programs for supporting venture capital and startups in Michigan. And then before that, I originally started off in automotive engineering and manufacturing. This is a really long time ago. Yeah. Also did some corporate finance in automotive and also M&A work in automotive. And that led me in the early 2000s to joining a startup, actually in the year 2000. In Ann Arbor. I worked at a few different startups over the next, I would say, about 6 or 7 years, and that led me to the MBDC, to working in economic development. So kind of my background is a blend of auto engineering and finance, startup work, economic development, and now investing at ID Ventures.
Yeah, talk a little bit about Invest Detroit and ID Ventures and kind of that, your organization and the focus. Because I feel it's almost the perfect blend of all of the things that you've done in the past, all in one amazing package.
You would think that I planned it this way, and that I just
really does seem totally intentional.
Meandered around in my career, which led me to ID Ventures. Well, you've had a few other people on your program from
I know, it's way so many.
We're
It
probably
is,
like your most popular guest, right?
from organizations, correct, because we actually don't usually have more than one person, but you guys are all such like unique. Like we normally don't have more than one person from an organization on, but we've had so many people from Invest Detroit on because you all have complete like different focuses and completely different backgrounds and things. So it like ends up being like, oh, we want to talk to someone about like the Detroit eco business community or something. And then it's like, oh, someone at Invest Detroit's good for that. And like, oh, we want to talk to someone about like their experience outside of Michigan, like coming to Michigan. It's like, oh, they've got someone good for that. Like, so it works out. But yeah,
So
talk about it from your point of view.
well, first of all, what kind of led me to Invest Detroit, I had gotten to know them through my work at when I was at the MEDC. Really liked the people there. It's funny. For anyone in the audience that may know Mahendra Ramsinghani, who you had as a guest on the show
Mahendra's
once.
been on,
I remember when I joined the MEDC. I remember my very first day there. Actually, Ned Stabler and I joined on the exact same day at MEDC, and I remember thinking, "Oh wow, this is going to be great! I'll get to work with Mahendra Ramsinghani, who I've known for years, and it'll be great working with him." And immediately when I joined the MEDC, he left 2 weeks later, so I never really got to work with him.
Man, that's a real switch out. So you got to work with Ned and not with Mahendra.
No, I love working with Ned. There's so many good people at the MEDC. But then, and Vince Nystrom at Renaissance, he was at the MEDC, and he's the one that actually hired me there. But then when I got to Invest Detroit, and I was leaving MEDC, joining Invest Detroit, and I knew like Mahendra was at Invest Detroit. He started our First Step Fund, which was our very first fund that we launched. And I thought, well, this will be great to work with Mahendra at Invest Detroit. And he left Invest Detroit. So I've always been chasing Mahendra from like job to job the last few years. That should be a book, I think. Chasing Mahendra. It sounds like a good.
That's a good, yeah. It'll be like the follow up to like he just released a book in like February, I think.
Yeah.
On venture capital, and he like writes a lot about venture capital for people who are like, who are you talking about? But it would be a really good follow up to be like a book about Mahendra. Like it would just be like with goggles, like with the binoculars on the cover. I like that.
So anyway, I did get to know a lot of people, and Adrian Fortino, obviously, for people who know him at Mercury Fund, he was the one that originally brought me to Invest Detroit to join the team, and there were a lot of people that kind of helped with that effort. Chris Ryzik, who I had met with when I was leaving MEDC, and Dave Egner, who was at the Ralph Wilson Foundation. They all kind of helped me, and then getting to know people like Dave Blaskowitz at Invest Detroit. I mean, just phenomenal, and obviously Patty Glaza, who everybody knows, but just phenomenal people at the company, and it's just been just such a great organization to work for. We've changed a lot in the years that I've been there. So in the first, obviously we're one of the most active, if not the most active, early seed investors in the state of Michigan. And for those that don't know, even we go by the name ID Ventures on the venture capital team. We are a part of Invest Detroit, but on the venture capital side, in our team, we invest statewide. So as far as the Upper Peninsula in Michigan, we have investments up there. We have investments all across the state. Certainly the majority of our investments are in Southeast Michigan, where the majority of the population and companies are, but we invest statewide with all of our funds. And started off when I first joined Invest Detroit 8 years ago, we had one fund. Now we're like starting our fourth fund. So things have just changed, and we've gotten a much bigger team, where initially it was just two of us, like me and Adrian, and then me and Patty. And now we have a team of, I think, 7 full-time people on the venture team, and just a really solid, great team that we work with. We're so fortunate to have such good people.
Yeah, it's like if you guys weren't the most active investor before the pandemic, you certainly have solidified that title now because my God, I like can't even believe it. Like how many investments you guys have made like over the last 18 months. I'm like, don't they sleep? Like what's going on? And like also like you guys have like the like such a good portfolio. It's like anytime like you're like, oh, this company is really awesome. Like I wonder who their investors are. Like it's always like, oh, ID Ventures is like the only like the one I know, or like the only local one, or whatever. Like I always feel like you guys are able to like kind of like cultivate these like really good investments super early.
Well, we did, the last few years, we've just really ramped up our investing. We've, launched our first capital fund, which is a really active fund in partnership with the MEDC. We've also received support from New Economy Initiative and the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, and they've really enabled us to, really deploy a lot of capital, those organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So thanks to them. We do one or two new investments every month. That's kind of the pace that we're on in new companies, and we've grown to an active portfolio now that's over 100 companies. We have, I think, in total in the last 10 years since we've been investing, we have now over 170 companies that we've invested in. And a lot of those companies are multiple investments. So if you look at the number of investments we make, it's probably closer to 400 or 500 in the last 10 years, if not more than that. So yeah, super active. We don't see the pace slowing down soon. We're just doing a lot of deals. One of the things that really went crazy with adding to our portfolio is we partnered with the state in launching this technology startup stabilization fund, which is kind of a component of our first capital fund, but it was really set up to help venture-backed startups survive the pandemic. So extend their runways and enable them to hopefully add some more months to the runway, so that if they were running into capital issues, they could make the changes that they needed to. They could cut expenses. They could do what they needed and get their internal investors maybe in a bridge round and help pull together some capital that could help extend those runways and keep our really good startup companies from going out of business just because they happen to hit the end of at the end of a capital position in the company where they just weren't able to raise. And so we launched that fund right after the pandemic hit and things shut down, and we did investments in 58 companies in 3 months. So that was a crazy time. Just doing the agreement. These are all investments. They weren't grants. They're mostly convertible notes or safe investments, and just getting that volume of deals done in companies. We really learned to be efficient with how we do our diligence in companies and how we can execute quickly to get a deal done.
Yeah. So you guys invest largely like in pretty early stage companies that have like some traction and like some revenue, right? But then they're not huge companies yet.
It doesn't have to necessarily be revenue, but yeah, I would. Generally, they're at the pre-seed or early seed stages, generally before they have like a proper seed round of the company is where we tend to invest. We're technology agnostic, so we really look at anything that's scalable and that's venture backable, that's on what we say is a venture capital path. So our whole goal is to put companies in a position where they can scale, get some early customers, and then hit the milestones that they need to raise larger rounds of capital from funds that are much larger than ours. So that's kind of how we describe our purpose, filling that really early stage capital gap at the pre-seed and early seed levels.
Yeah. So between like your time at like startups in Ann Arbor or at the Michigan Economic Development Corporation or at Invest Detroit, like what have you seen kind of as like the evolution of like, especially the early stage tech community?
Yeah, I think, well, we're all doing Zoom calls now, so that's changed things. And how we communicate, I think, is different. Certainly a change in the early stage tech community. I think that's enabled us to have broader reach outside of the state. So especially with, connections to out-of-state investors. Recently, I think we have a lot more out-of-state investors that are now more active in the Midwest in terms of not just looking in their specific areas, but have kind of broadened their reach. So our networks are stronger, I think. We've had a lot of out-of-state venture firms that are more interested in Michigan and more interested in Midwest locations and searching for deals because companies can operate remotely now and they can be anywhere, and because of just the talent and the good startups that we have here. So I think there's been an influx of some new capital sources from out of the state. I don't know. Does your research show any of that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely been like a rapidly increasing amount of capital coming from outside of the state that we see invested in companies. And I think it used to be a little bit more that I felt like companies were having to like travel around the country to like raise that capital. It was like kind of taking away a lot of like their ability to focus like on like what they needed to do to grow their company because they were spending so much time fundraising out of the state. But definitely with the, like popularity of Zoom calls and people being like, oh, I'm comfortable like getting to know someone virtually and not needing to like fly there and things like that, I think has like increased that pretty significantly, but like made it so that it's a lot more efficient for founders to actually be able to fundraise elsewhere. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out in like the next couple of years, because I'm always like, oh gosh, are all these companies just gonna like move away? Or maybe like the fact that like people are liking remote work so much now, like maybe that will become less popular. So I don't know. It is interesting to see.
Yeah, it's interesting, and we've certainly seen some new talent starting companies coming from, maybe they had family here in Michigan or they decided to move back, and that's become much more frequent that we've seen entrepreneurs that maybe came from Chicago or New York or LA or somewhere that ended up moving here and starting a company here. So, and being able to establish their networks here. I think it's also really unique to see like companies now in much more distributed models. And so as for us, it makes things a little bit different because we're so focused on supporting companies that are physically located in the state of Michigan. And that's kind of where we set our boundaries for investments, is we want to support companies that are here in the state. But then how do you really define that now when you have people working everywhere? So we certainly want at least the founders or the main founding team to be here. But it is kind of stretching the limits. Just the way companies are being run now in a completely virtual manner is really unique, and it'll be interesting to see how that changes over time.
Yeah, for sure. What advice would you give a founder that's kind of like starting to prepare to pitch to VCs or for like the first time?
Well, I guess one is to know the format of the pitch. We obviously get pitches from founders all the time. We're generally pretty laid back with how we handle first-time meetings with founders, but we don't want people to come in totally unprepared. So I would say know how the firm wants to see your first-time introduction. Do they want you to run through a slide deck? Do they want you to have a casual conversation? What's their preferred format? And it's, really easy to ask that just before you have the call, like, how do you want us to structure the call in advance? And that goes a long way, because we've had entrepreneurs come in and they, back when we did in-person meetings, they came in with just a notepad, or somebody comes in presenting a deck in a formal way. Somebody has a, rehearsed pitch where they kind of memorize it and go through it, and others are just not prepared at all. So it's just a wide range of ways that you can pitch for the very first time. So knowing, I think, how the firm wants the pitch to run in advance, and just asking that question can really help to not screw things up in that very first meeting, because that's really what you don't want to do. You want to go to a second meeting after that and make sure you start off things well.
Do you feel like there's been a time where you've seen someone that's like just done everything right that you're like, we're so amazed by, or maybe like the opposite, where someone did something that you're like, that's a really common pitfall, but it was kind of like a little bit like, oh gosh.
I think it's easier to remember the ones where they make some huge mistake and some big pitfall. With meetings, happening mostly by Zoom nowadays, I think, we've had meetings where there's been technology issues and things, and that can really throw things off in a meeting. One example is an entrepreneur pitched us, and he and his team, they were all in different locations, but the CEO was kind of leading the pitch, and he was at the time out on a hike in the woods while he was pitching us, and he had his camera turned off, but he was walking around in the woods while he was pitching. And I'd say that doesn't go over so well when you're not like really focused and sitting down and focusing on the pitch, but doing something else like in the background, and not having your camera on, and being, I can understand wanting to be outside, but take the meeting seriously, and don't just be like on a nature walk while you're pitching to a potential investor.
I feel like his colleagues must have just been like, God, why? I do find, just even generally, it is interesting how it's so much easier to get into a conversation when the other person has like good lighting, or like that there's no bad internet connection. Like, it's strange how when you have to communicate this way, like during the pandemic, like how it's like the more like crystal clear you can see them, like there's no computer issues, like kind of getting in between the conversation. Like, it's a lot easier to kind of ignore the technology than like when they've got the camera off, or like it's on, but it's like they're shrouded in darkness. Have you had any of those calls where you're like, why don't you turn a light on in the room you're in? What's happening right now? Oh my gosh.
There are a lot of other kind of pitfalls we see as well. I mean, it's always, just in general, I guess, just being honest and transparent. It's, you can always kind of tell when somebody's hiding something in a pitch, and it comes out eventually anyway. So I always prefer if founders are just really honest and transparent. If they don't know an answer to a question, just say you don't know, and can I get back to you on that? Instead of trying to make something up, is always the advice I give to founders. And it always seems to, at least for our team, it goes over well when you just kind of have that open dialogue, honest and transparency, because, the worst thing you can do is hide something, and eventually you get into diligence. And, for example, like if we've had some companies where they've had some debt that wasn't disclosed to us, and then you get into diligence, and then you uncover this debt or salaries that were outstanding and needed to be reimbursed, and these kind of weird things that, just tell people up front. Don't try to hide it until the very end, because that, those kinds of things can really damage a relationship. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. So you worked in economic development. I mean, like, so for people that don't know, like the Michigan Economic Development Organization is kind of like does economic development for like the whole state. I think like a lot of people would like recognize it because it was the like Pure Michigan, like they did that campaign back in the day. And so Martin was like the king of the entire entrepreneurship team. Like it was like there was like I don't even know how many, like 50 people underneath you that did economic development that was like focused on like entrepreneurship in Michigan. You're like, most of what you're saying is only partially right. um, what do you feel like economic development organizations, like what is their like role in supporting the startup community, or like how do you think they can kind of like could better serve the startup community now that you're kind of like you're not in economic development anymore, you're like on this side of the table now, and like how do you think they could be like better supporting the startup community?
All right, well, first I have to say you know, I am an alumni of the MEDC, as are you. Yep. And I love the people there. So they're just wonderful.
General. I mean, you could even be giving advice to people that are in Ohio or wherever. So I like how you're frozen right now. Is that's so funny, Martin. Oh, you were frozen for a second, but it totally frozen? Looked like you orchestrated the freeze because you didn't want to answer. Like you were like frozen, like that. That's so funny. Okay, yes. So if you just said something, repeat it. I didn't hear anything.
I mean, I think I'll preface my response by saying, you know, I think at least in Michigan, I really appreciate that the MEDC and the economic developers in the state have kind of stayed on focus on their strategy of, there's just been, you know, they've created some really great programs in the state of Michigan, whether it's, you know, supporting the early stage funds like ours with First Capital Fund or the Business Accelerator Fund or the incubators and accelerators and the smart zones in our state. I think what the MEDC has at least done well in Michigan is supporting those kinds of organizations and funds consistently over time, and versus changing things up every couple of years. So I think, you know, my advice to economic developers in the Midwest is to find out, you know, programs that work and work really well, and continue to fund those programs. It becomes really easy to want to do the next kind of shiny thing and to do something new, and you know, it takes a long time to really develop a startup ecosystem. So ongoing support for programs, I think, is really important over a very long period. And I think that's one thing that's really been done well in Michigan, at least since the time that I left the MEDC, that you and I left. They've done a really nice job in supporting these really major early stage capital programs that have supported just lots of companies and done really well over the last you know, decade. So that's one piece of advice. Another piece of advice I'd say is, you know, I think sometimes in economic development it gets really easy to kind of focus on particular technologies or particular clusters or you know, what's hot at the moment, kind of technology sectors. And, you know, my advice is focus on scalability. To me, it's not as important like what sector it is. Certainly you want to support the sectors where your state is strong and has the talent and technology and that. But I think what's really important is scalability. Companies that can scale quickly and add lots of jobs. I mean, that's the real focus of economic development, is to promote that job creation. So sometimes don't get caught up in like very particular technology sectors, but instead I think focusing on scalability, and companies that can create those jobs is more important.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Yeah, that's totally, there have been times like probably over the last like 15 years where like there'll be something that's, oh yeah, like this sector or something seems like it's gaining some traction or whatever, but then all of a sudden like economic development organizations become obsessed with it, and like you'll see like it's like the new word of the day or something. Like you'll be like, oh god, what is going on? Like why are you guys all obsessed with it? It's been around, like people have been focusing on it, but you just discovered it and it's like shiny, like I want that. So that is a really good point. And like the long-term focus, like I agree with that as well. Cause like I feel like a lot of the times, particularly when not necessarily with economic development organizations, but when we're like talking to like legislators who are like, that kind of changes over, and like we've got, term limits and things like that in Michigan. And so like you see these like people that come in and then they just like want a completely new focus from the person who was in office beforehand and all of that. But like that really, to like make meaningful change, it's like a 20-year thing. Like it's like you have to kind of stay the course for like 20 years to really like build up a foundation of something. So if you're switching every 5 years, you were like basically just like wasting all of that extra time because you're not letting anything take hold. But
you got it. I should be interviewing you.
No. That's why I'm on every episode. Every episode's like a tiny bit of interviewing Emily. Okay. So Yulia says on Facebook, she says, does Martin see any ways for established, successful Detroit entrepreneurs to support newer entrepreneurs in the overall startup ecosystem? And she's from Airspace Link. Yay!
Oh, wow. Airspace
I've been hearing
Link,
so much about Airspace Link lately, so I'm like, oh!
Yeah, they're great. We have an investment in Airspace Link. We love them. Yeah, I think, certainly there are informal and more formal ways to do that. There are organizations in Detroit like Bamboo and others that kind of bring together Detroit entrepreneurs, and obviously Tech Town as well, that have support and doing that peer-to-peer connections through events. We try to do that with our portfolio. Since our portfolio has gotten so big, we actually have a dedicated Slack workspace for our portfolio companies so that they can communicate with each other. And so we try to bring founders together that may be working in either similar industries or others. We have different programming that we launch. We've been toying with ideas to bring in like particular, sectors together and into small groups, and that's something that I think we'll be doing more of in the future. But so, I think there's various ways of doing that. For Airspace Link, they're a member of our portfolio company. They're one of our portfolio companies, and we'd obviously love to introduce them to some of the other companies in our portfolio to make sure that are also in Detroit. I guess it's a little bit harder now that everybody's working remotely, but there are ways to do it in virtual ways as well. And so, lots of ways to do that. So
yeah. I always really like to, like, whenever you see like these more experienced entrepreneurs like on panels or like giving like in interviews and things like that, because you can kind of like get to know them a little bit better and then like hear what they have to say. And like, so I feel like that too is like, there's so many things like this nowadays that like people are like doing these interviews and stuff. So it's like, maybe that would be a good way too. I also like will remember these quotes and then I'll misattribute them. Like I'll be like, one time Doug Song said on a panel, and then I'll just make up, like I'll have this thing that I thought he said that people will be like, I don't remember him saying that. And then like, it really, I feel like sounded great at the time, but now I just butcher the quote for the rest of eternity. So what is on the horizon for Invest Detroit? Like we're going into the next phase of this pandemic. We're not done with it. ever. What is kind of like things you guys are thinking about for like these next 18 months?
Well, I mean, I hope we get back in the office. I am in my office today, but I'm the only person here. But hopefully that will happen in the next 18 months, and that we'll be getting together face to face and doing things. I think, for us as an organization, we're really focused on getting to sustainability with some of our funding programs to really create an evergreen fund, a true evergreen fund for the state of Michigan that can support that really early stage Michigan startup companies in perpetuity, so that we have enough funds coming in from our returns to not only continue to invest in companies because we recycle those into more companies, but also to fund our operations as well. That's what we're building toward, is really creating that sustainable evergreen source of funding for early stage Michigan companies. We've, as I mentioned, we've grown our team substantially. Where it was 2 people, now we're 7 just on the venture side. Plus we have our whole kind of back office team at Invest Detroit that helps us with marketing and accounting and all of that. We're looking forward to in the next 18 months to launching some new funds. We're particularly interested in supporting underrepresented founders, and we have plans of launching a new fund that will really support Black, Brown founders in Michigan and underrepresented people, to really increase the diversity of our portfolio, increase the diversity of our investments, and be more inclusive in what we do as an organization. We're already very focused on that, but we intend to ramp that up and do that in more and more in the coming years to really support all kinds of entrepreneurs and those that may not have access to the same kinds of networks that that still have a chance to start their businesses and scale them in Michigan.
Yeah, great. I love that. And then where can people go to find out more about Invest Detroit? Like where?
Yeah, so they can go to our website for the venture capital side, or on ID Ventures. It's investdetroit.vc is our website. And investdetroit.com is kind of our parent company's website that also links into us.
Okay, awesome. We'll put that in the comments too, just so people can be like, oh, I'm going to find out more. Well, yay. It's always good to be talking to you and Invest Detroit. So I'm like, yay. So thank you so much for taking the time, and I will hopefully be seeing you in not too long. Yay. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on the Cackle.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye, Emily.